good to be here and in Lebanon with you. There's so many similarities in terms of what I'm feeling being here in comparison to South Africa, the country that I grew up in. And I can remember being 10 years old and being at the height of the apartheid era in South Africa. Nelson Mandela was just about to be released. And the country was very much on the brink of civil war. People didn't know if civil war was going to happen or not. But the main thing that I can remember from being 10 years old and being at such a critical point in history was that there was an energy in the air. And it didn't matter where you went in the country, there was just this sense of something is going to happen, something is going to change, something completely different that we've never ever thought about or encountered is about to take place. And I can definitely say to you, stepping off of the plane last night and just being here in Beirut and being here at the conference today, I sense the same type of energy that I felt as a child in South Africa. And I want to tell you a story about how I became interested in human behavior, because the innovation that I'm going to be talking to you about today is all about human behavior. When we talk about the future, we very often think about the technologies that are disrupting the future. We think about all of the gadgets, the hardware. We think about the computers and everything like that, the software. But very, very few people take a step back and go, what about the human? How do we as humans need to change in order to embrace this future? And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. But first, the story. So I was 10 years old, and like I said to you, because of the change that was happening in South Africa, crime became a very big problem. But the crime that was happening in South Africa is what you call syndicate crime. So it was highly, highly organized crime. And so what they would do is they would send people out into the normal suburbs where people lived. And basically, these people would act as spies. And so the school bus dropped me off at my house after school the one afternoon. And I walked up our driveway, and there was a man sitting there outside our door. And he was dressed very, very scruffily, and he was begging for food. And he said to me, "Can I please have food?" And something inside of me, even though I was only 10 years old, said to me, this man is not actually hungry. He's looking for something else. And so I walked into the house, and I closed all the doors, and I said to him, "It's fine, I'll bring you food." I got the food, took the food to him, but then closed all the doors, and I went into one of the rooms where I could look what he was doing. And he was pretending to want food, but he was actually looking at all the entryways into our house and where they could enter into our house. And then what I did was I let him finish his food, and I actually offered him more food because I knew that I would help him by doing that, because then he could plot some more. Because I want to figure out what this man is doing. And so I let him finish eating, and then what I did was I basically got dressed, and so I walked into the street, and I got dressed in clothes where he wouldn't be able to recognize me, and I followed him for pretty much about 2 hours that afternoon. And what eventually happened was, at every single house where they figured out that they could break into the house, they had basically put chalk into the bottom of their shoes, and they were marking the pavements outside the house with either a cross or a circle, okay? And the cross basically meant that is where they were going to break in that night, and the circle meant don't touch that house. And so what I did was, when my dad got home that afternoon, I said to him, "We have to go to the police station right now." And he was like, "Why do we have to go to the police station?" And I was like, "Because I figured something out, and I have to tell the police about it." And so what we did was, he got into the car, we went to the police station, and basically that night, they were able to bust one of the syndicates that was operating in our area, because they had figured out, I'd basically figured that pattern out on the ground. And so that night, around the dinner table, I said to my dad, one day I'm going to become a detective. So fast forward 20 years, I never became the detective, but I did become a detective of human behavior. And so I realized the way humans act and behave really, really interests me. And so I've built my entire career around that. And so the experiment that Paul told you about is just one of many, many experiments that I conduct on a very regular basis to understand how humans interact. And what I'm going to share with you today is is basically some of the most cutting-edge research that has been done recently, like within the last 6 months, around what are the skills that human beings need to embrace in order to be able to move into the future. So can I just see by a show of hands, how many of you currently work inside? Okay. How many of you would be startup entrepreneurs about to start businesses? Okay, good to know. So there's 2 institutions that are currently doing very, very, very interesting work with skills that human beings need to embrace in order to move into the future. The first one is actually called the Future Institute, and what they've identified is they've identified 10 skills that human beings need to embrace in order to move into the future. And what we've done is we've teamed up with a digital anthropologist. So it's people who study how cultures change because of the digitalization of society. And what we as a company have done is we've teamed up with her name is Lisa Moretti, and we've asked the question, what distinguishes a human being from a machine? Okay? Because we need to understand what those differences in order to be able to go into the future. So, these are based 10 skills that the Future Institute has identified as the skills that human beings need to embrace in order to be able to go into the future. Now, I am not going to go through every single one of those because they're pretty big words and there's a lot of stuff to discuss about them. But I'd like to focus on transdisciplinarity. So the 4th one on that list, transdisciplinarities. And this, I believe, is one of the biggest changes that human beings are going to have to embrace in order to be able to move into the future. Now, what does transdisciplinarity mean? It means that you are most likely going to have to reinvent yourself as a human being inside a job about 20 times in your career, okay? That means that approximately every 2 years, 2 to 3 years, you are going to be embracing a completely new career, okay? And if you think about it, that has a huge impact on what you're doing today. And so you're going to have a very serious problem down the line, okay? And the next one that I want to specifically talk about is cross-cultural competency. Now, if you think about it, what's really interesting about globalization is that it's expanded our world, but at the same time, it's made us very narrow. Because all of a sudden, you don't need to go anywhere anymore because everything is right there. And yet, in order to compete and work in a global economy, you need to really understand different culture and to embrace them. And the interesting thing about it is that at the same time, there's this need and desire to be strongly identified with your culture. And so if you look at all of those 10 skills over there, those are things you have to embrace. And the interesting thing about it is that universities and schools don't teach these skills, okay? And so the question we have to ask ourselves is, these are the skills that we're going to be tested on for the future, and if this is what human beings need to be in the future, what has to change? Because quite a lot has to change. So coming back to that question, what is the difference between a machine and a human being? Ultimately, there's 2 key things that differentiate a human and a machine. It's critical thinking and creativity, okay? And underneath creativity and critical thinking, there's very specific skills which you can see there, okay? And if you look at some of those skills, particularly under the category of critical thinking, active listening, empathy, okay? Those are things that typically we haven't been taught as human beings, okay? You're taught that almost by default in a family situation, but very seldom, if you are sitting in an interview, are you questioned whether you actually know how to listen. And yet these are the skills that you are going to need. And the reality is, as you are sitting here today, a machine is most likely going to be doing your job in 2 to 3 years' time. And it's these things that as a human being is going to be the thing that your future career is going to be founded on, okay? So, coming back to that question I asked, so what? It's great to look at a list of 10 skills. It's great to look at this list and go, yay, those are the things I need to be in the future. But what does that mean for right now? The implications of this, what are my 20, 30 careers going to be over my lifespan? Okay? And your job is most likely not teaching it to you right now. You're actively going to have to go and develop these skills yourself. And most importantly, if you are sitting here as an entrepreneur, you're going to have to really, really think about staying competitive inside your company, that are going to be the people who are going to be innovating, who are going to be taking your company forward. And so your team is going to have to be made up of that. The way we recruit people is going to completely have to change. Okay? The way we hire and onboard people, the way we train and upskill people, completely going to have to change. And so as a business leader and as a startup entrepreneur, all of a sudden, culture inside your company, how you develop culture, how you foster innovation, how you foster that critical design thinking mentality inside your company becomes absolutely, absolutely critical. So my challenge to you today from an innovation stage perspective is, okay, number one, don't underestimate how critically important it is to reinvent yourself. That's number one, okay? You have to really, really think about how you are going to reinvent yourself 20 to 30 times over in the next few years. And the next challenge is, what are you going to do about these skills? Because if you're not going to go and adapt and embrace these skills, and if you're not going to become more human, essentially, okay, if you're not going to start differentiating yourself from a machine, you're going to have a problem. So how are you going to do that? And then my third challenge to you is, as of today, stop when you're thinking about technology and digitalization in the future. Don't only think about the technology. Think about the human. Because the human is going to become more and more and more importantly into the future. Thank you. It's been good to be here.